the source of it.
What's Matt Walsh doing here? Evil man, right? Pine Creek Politics is always going live when I have to work. Adulting is overrated. I don't recommend it. But that's what gives you hope, meaning, and purpose. Okay, on average, how much do you guys worry? Before we get into Lex Fridman here, let's bring this up for posterity. I know there's hardly anybody here, but the people who are here are special in the eyes of God. No, I'm kidding. Nobody worries a lot here. I worry somewhat, 62%. I rarely worry about things, 25%. Almost never, life is too short, 16%. Okay, here's my hypothesis. The higher you up on this chart, the more likely you are to be leaning left and liberal, Democrat, whatever you want to call it. That's my hypothesis. Do you guys agree with me? And the lower you are on this chart. Now, I understand people worry about different things. The right worries about stuff. The left worries about stuff. Like the right worries about, what does the right worry about? They worry about big government taking over. They worry about obese trans people, no, transvestites dancing in front of their kids. They're worried about prayer no longer in schools, that sort of thing. But on average, I think people on the left worry more than people on the right, which makes them less happy. Am I wrong? There's my trigger of the day. No, actually, it's not. I'm going to trigger. I'm going to keep this poll up for a bit, and you feel free to answer. It'd be cool to have like separate polls for people who self-identify as Republican or Democrat or right or left and see how they would answer. Okay, one person here at least says I'm always worrying. Whoever that person is, would you raise your hand and admit where you lean politically? Right now, you're worrying about the left worrying. No, I'm not worrying about the left worrying. I kind of find it funny. Well, funny might be the wrong word, but tragically funny, maybe. Okay, another quiz here. Well, this is a poll, a quiz. Please don't Google, okay? Be honest. Am I too loud, by the way? I'm noticing I'm hot. I'll turn it down a scotch. Without Googling, fastest one to answer wins in the chat. Name the, by population, name the biggest country in the world. First one to get that wins. Wins nothing. China's correct. Who can name number 2? Germania wins. The second biggest by population country in the world. No Googling. India, Mel Beeds, correct. By population, third largest country in the world. Correct, Paul Schlechter. In fact, those are the top. Oh no, what did I say? Did I say we're at number 3, right? United States is third. India was 2. I'm not sure which question people are answering now, so I'm just going to give you the answers now. Here's the top 10 countries in the world by population, and I want you to really listen to it. China, India, United States, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Russia, Mexico. That's the top 10. Is there any surprises in there? Okay, now I want to bring up something here. Let's put that over there. Oh yeah, that'll work. In fact, let's go a little lower. Japan is number 11. 12 Ethiopia, 13 Philippines, 14 Egypt, 15 Vietnam, 16 Congo, 17 Turkey, Iran, Germany, Thailand. Okay, now here's my triggering question of the day. Out of the top 10 countries in the world by population, which do you think is the most racist? Which do you think is the most racist, and which country is the least racist out of the top 10? Think about it. Look at that list. Now, some of you have been in one country for your whole life. And if that's true, I'm double you. I've been in 2 countries my whole life. 50% Canada, 50% United States. But I don't have any brothers. I was raised with 3 sisters, but the one person who I consider my biological brother is my double first cousin. Do you know what a double first cousin is? A double first cousin is you're a first cousin on both sides of the family. So my father married my cousin's, my father and my mother, they had a brother and sister who also got married. So my double first cousin is probably as close genetically as you can be without actually being a brother. And he's lived in United States. He's lived in Canada. Canada's not even, yeah, it's down here somewhere. Where's Canada? There it is, number 39. He's lived in Canada, United States. He's lived in Bangladesh. He's lived in Pakistan. Where's Pakistan on this list? Up here, number 5. He's lived in China. Where else has he lived? He's lived in Jordan. Jordan's probably way down. Where else has he lived? I think I'm missing 1 or 2. But anyhow, so I live vicariously through him. He's been all over the world. And he's my source for truth. Okay? Everybody says, well, what's your source, Doug? My source is him. He's lived many years in many different countries. And he will tell you that the correct answer to my question of which of these top 10 most populous countries is the least racist is United States by far. United States is the least racist country out of the 10 most populous countries in the world, which make up basically, close to 50% of the world's population, the top 10. You go to China, Indonesia, Pakistan. These countries are monolithic societies that when someone who looks different walks in, and sometimes I'm talking about reverse racism too. Like if a white person were to walk into a medical clinic in Bangladesh, they are front of the line. They say, hey, you're white, get up here. True story. This is what my cousin says. He had to go to the medical clinic. Long line of people. You're white, get up here. Because they think, now this is a form of racism, right? It's like, we're assuming that you have lots of money and we want your money, so come on to the front. These other people we might care for, but they might not even pay us. Why did I bring this up? Just to trigger people, I guess. Does anybody disagree with me, though? That the United States is the least racist country? I would say it's the least racist country, even the top 20. Maybe Germany is least racist, but I don't know. I don't know if you guys are history buffs, but Germany has a weird history. The United Kingdom's number 21. They might be less racist than the United States, but barely. So I want you to remember that if you're a person who just, man, I just don't like our country, the United States. It's doing better than China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria. Oh, actually, I have a friend who lives is from Brazil. I should ask him that question if he agrees with me. Okay, let's get back to the poll. Now we're up to 13%, worrying all the time. So most people here worry somewhat. Oh, but that's the biggest one so far. Yeah, I would consider myself, I worry almost never. So that's interesting. Okay, let's get to Lex Fridman. Now that we have 50 people here. This is long. It's 4 hours and 11 minutes, so we're not going to watch everything. But I'm going to, I guess, just... I've watched some of this before. I'm just going to flip from thing to thing here. And talk about climate alarmism first. And I think this is related to this poll. If I'm right with my hypothesis that people on the left tend to worry on average more than people on the left, on the right, people on the left worry more, then you're probably more likely to be a climate alarmist and worry and be more passionate and be more angry with people who don't agree with you. And I don't know if I know what they're going to say here, but maybe I've listened to this before.
Making it about fossil fuels, which implicitly gives you another great narrative, good guy, bad guy. It's these big companies.
Where's the source of alarmism? So,
by the way, I just want to say Lex Fridman is the best example of AI among humans. He is just, when I first listened to him, going, how does this guy have millions of subscribers? It's because he's dead inside. That's how. Well, why don't I have millions of subscribers? So I guess I don't ask for them, or care, and have a crappy audio and video setup compared to him, and don't get big guests. But anyhow, he's like, if you've seen Westworld, there's robots in Westworld and they look like humans and talk like humans and act like humans, and they have like these little tablets and you can adjust their affectation and their emotion. And Lex Fridman is right at the bottom. It's like he is so chill. It's unbelievable. Maybe too chill.
Is it the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? Like, what? There's a chain here. Is there somebody to blame along the chain, or is this some kind of weird, complex system where everybody encourages each other? Can you point to one place? Is it the media? Is it the scientists?
I think the UN Climate Panel is fundamentally a really good climate research group. You can have some quibbles with the way that they sort of summarize it in politically coordinated documents and stuff, but fundamentally, I think they do a good job of putting together all the research. This also means it's incredibly boring to read, which is why virtually nobody does it. I'm sure you have, but I'm pretty sure.
I think this guy's a real scientist, and this guy's a science reporter. Maybe I should have double checked that.
A lot of climate journalists have never sort of looked past the at least the summary for policymakers.
So the climate panel, they do they do predictions as well.
No, well, they pull together all the stuff that people have published in the peer literature, and then try to summarize it and basically tell you what's up and down with climate change. They do that in four large volumes every 4 to 5 to 6, 7 years or something. And yes, it's I think it's the gold-plated version of what we know. There tends to be a lot of this is what they say. Actually, they say so many different places with so many different people that it's not quite clear exactly what they're saying. Often, you can sort of find contradictions between one volume with one set of authors and another. But look, I think this is fundamentally the right way that we know about climate. But then it gets translated into how do you know about this? When most people don't read these 4,000 pages.
Yeah, I think where he's going with this is that the scientists are pretty chill. They're kind of like Lex Fridman's personality, pretty chill, but you get more of the passion from the reporting of it. I think that's where they're going with this.
Read a news story in a newspaper, and that news story will be very, very heavily slanted towards, if you say, so sea levels could rise somewhere between 1 and 3 foot. What do you hear? Yeah, you obviously hear the 3 foot. 3 foot is just, more fun, more scary, more interesting than 1 foot. And it's that way with all of these, so what's the prediction?
By the way, sea levels rising 1 to 3 feet. Without Googling, this is another test, another quiz. Don't Google. God is watching. If you Google, he will smite you like Ananias and Sapphira. Okay? Without Googling. Based on, let's say, the last decade of sea level rise, what is the annual, and if you know the answer because I've asked you before, like there's some of you here I've asked this question before, so don't answer. What's the annual average sea level rise in inches? Because this is America. America, we don't use metric because that's base 10 and that makes too much sense. We do weird things like 12 inches in a foot and 3 feet in a yard, all that weird stuff. 5,280 feet in a mile, is that right? Something like that. What's your guess? You got to be more specific. Just, Kyle, there's such a thing as called, anyhow, I don't want to bias anybody. What is the average annual sea level rise? Don't Google. Please don't. It takes all the fun away. Oh, semi-demiurge. You're too intelligent using centimeters. There's 2.5 centimeters in an inch. So you're saying 0.4 of an inch. We got 0.25 in an inch. We got 0.01 of an inch. We have 3 feet for Danny. Danny, you are an alarmist. No idea, honest answer. You can guess, Adam. 1 inch, says Stephanie. So based on the last decade, what's the average annual increase in sea level? We got 0.5 inch. Okay, the correct answer is, are you ready? Drum roll. The correct answer is 0.13. 0.13 of an inch. So basically 1/10 of 1 inch. So I think, Nathan, you were the closest. Or maybe someone else was close too. So let's take our calculators out, shall we? And take, they mentioned 1 to 3 feet sea level rise. How long does it take for the sea level to rise 3 feet? Well, 3 feet is 36 inches divided by 0.13. That's 277 years. 277 years. Are you guys alarmed? Are you scared? Are you terrified? No, we all will be dead in 277 years. And let our kids handle it. Now, I know Uber Scheiser is here and he lives in Florida. Uber Scheiser, how high is the bottom of your house from sea level? Or anybody who lives along the coast? What is the elevation change between your home and sea level? I'm curious. I don't even know what the correct answer is. Because let me get the notepad out here. Uber Scheiser, are you here? Anybody live on the coast here? Where will the 3 feet of water come from? Great question, Gresham. It comes from 2 places. It comes from ice caps and also comes from the expansion of water due to warming. You know, things expand. Garage is 8 feet. I'm on a mound. Okay, so 8 feet, it will take roughly 700 years. Now, I know that I'm not counting like the foundation will be weakened because, you know, as water creatures, but to get to your garage, Uber Scheiser, will take 2.5 times 4, 6, 800 years. 800 years. So start preparing, Uber Scheiser. Anybody else? Like, let me bring up the notepad here. I just know some people are just going to hate this. Where's my notepad? It will do Paint. Paint, Microsoft Paint is amazing. I know most of you don't have it because you can't afford it. I love that joke. Okay, so here's the ocean. Oh, it's even in blue. Now, some coastlines are like this. They got a cliff, right? And some coastlines are like this. You know, you got, and then you got water. But I'm curious to know if you just go, I don't know, 100 feet in from the coast, what is the average elevation change from, let's say, here to, let's say, I don't know, 100 feet in? What is the average elevation change around the world? I don't know the answer to that. But someone just wrote 800 feet in California. Okay, let's say that's, let's say the average is 400 feet, half that. I tell you, people are going to hate me saying this. What's 400 feet divided by 0.13, the average annual increase? Oh, that will take 3,077 years. 3,077 years. Okay, let's get back to Lex Fridman.
For temperature rises, it's somewhere from not very scary to pretty damn scary. And again, you hear the pretty damn scary all the time. And then there's obviously always researchers who are saying, well, but actually it could be a little more scary than that. And then there are likewise researchers who say, well, you know, it's probably not going to be as scary as that. And most of the journalists will,
So
interview
do you really put the blame fundamentally on the?
So Justin Maurer says in 50 years, 12 inches of rise. Well, the best projections are, but isn't greenhouse gas production going down, Justin? Isn't it going the next 50 years? It won't be as bad as the last 50 years? Or is it going to be worse?
The journalists.
I
Is
put
there-
on the media setup. Look, media is simply trying to get clicks or sell newspapers. And if you were just going to say, this is not a big issue, it just doesn't sell anything. But I think you're probably much better able to address this.
Well, no, folks can Google for my name, Revkin, and the words front page thought in the newsroom every afternoon. Now we have a 24/7 news cycle, so it's different. But back in the day, the New York Times, when it was a flourishing print institution, every afternoon there was a front page meeting, and the big poobah editors would go in there, and the desk editors come in with their pitches for the day. And my friend Corey Dean, who was the science editor for a chunk of my time, I remember having a conversation with her about.
But it's actually good. Like I love the comments in the live stream chat, because things like sea level rise and predictions of, let's say, 1 foot rise in 50 years, that's very falsifiable. I love that. So, for example, 2 years from now, I will be alive probably, and so everybody in here. In order for the sea level rise to rise 1 foot in 50 years, that sea level rise has to be exponential curve, almost exponential. It has to go from 0.13 inches per year to like the next year has to be like 0.18, and the next year 0.24, like in order to get it that 12 inches in 50 years, right? It has to go up. It has to increase. Now, if we don't see that, if we don't see, like, let's say next year is, instead of 0.13, it's 0.14. Oops. What if it's, even just 0.015? Oops. That projection of 1 foot in 50 years, probably wrong, right?
Some new study of, I think it was Greenland, the ice sheet, and I laid it out for her, and she said, where's the front page thought in that? So we're all set up to look for
The
that.
scary bit. No.
And the news environment has gotten so much worse than 10 or 20 years ago. At least you had filters and limited number of outlets, and there was some sense you could track was good or bad. There's lots of problems with that system too. But now you have an information buffet. So if you want to be alarmed, or you want to be stay in the tribe of those who think this is utter bull, you can find your flow. And that has led. But getting back to this specific question, the 2018 IPCC report, which was a special report commissioned to learn about the difference between 1.5 degrees of warming and 2, which sounds so weird and technocratic and complicated. That's the one that generated the whole meme about 8 years left
12 years
till
back then,
doomsday.
yeah, it was 2030.
And that's
Can you
the one.
explain the meme?
This was the idea that there's a point if we don't cut emissions in half by whatever it was, 2050,
2030, yeah.
we're doomed. That emerged from that specific report. And it wasn't something that was in the report. It was in the spin around the report. And that's what captivated Greta appropriately as a young person going, and with her unique
Yeah, they're talking about Greta Thunberg. Is that her name?
vantage point and stuff. And that report, I still need to dig in and write something deeper about what happened with that particular.
Yeah, and Nathan, I don't think anybody's we're talking about projections, right? The rate of the sea level rising being linear. I mentioned exponential. I'm saying that if you are making a projection of 1 foot in 50 years, then the sea level rise cannot be linear. It has to be maybe not exponential, but really the rate of increase has to be going up, which is great for scientists because that is falsifiable. That is like clear-cut markers. If 5 years from now, the rate of sea level rise is 0.16 and it was 0.13, we know that projection is going to be wrong, right? It's a pretty good marker.
Dynamics created this recent burst of we're doomed rhetoric that I think you're focusing on. And it's all in the external interpretations, which journalism laps up because we're looking for the front page thought. But it's not just the journalists, it's the whole system. NGOs.
And basically what they're saying here is that most of the doomsday stuff is not coming from scientists. It's coming from the reporting of people reading the scientists. And they're saying, just like most media, like sensationalism sells, right?
Environmental groups. If in developing country, well-meaning leaders in developing countries, because of the structure of this treaty that goes back to 1992, that's the Paris Agreement is part of, they are now really looking for a way to portray this as a CO2 problem, not a vulnerability. Well, there's a vulnerability aspect, but like in Pakistan, their climate minister, which they didn't even have a climate minister 5 years ago, is blaming everything that happened in Pakistan on carbon dioxide warming the climate, creating this, when a lot of what was going on was also on the ground. And you can blame colonialism, Pakistan's history, all kinds of things. But under the treaty, you want it to be about CO2 because that puts the onus on rich countries. You're not paying us. Where's our money? And they're right, in the context of what everyone agreed to. There was supposed to be $100 billion a year from rich countries to poor countries starting in 2020. It didn't happen. It's like basically some money is flowing, but it's not really
made up money.
Yeah. And so that whole dynamic, they latch on to the climate science and they so they're there and they're very handy, quotable people. And you have a justice angle. You have bad guys and good guys.
Yeah. They're bringing up this point about transfer of wealth from rich countries to poor countries. Did I get rid of that? No, I didn't. Like, look at this. If you think global warming is a Western problem, well, it is a Western problem, but who's responsible? You got to focus on the top 10 biggest countries in the world. China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Russia, Mexico, Japan, Ethiopia, Philippines. Now, that's going to be a tough sell.
Which fits all of these narrative threads that come together into this information storm we're still living with.
And then, of course, it's not Pakistan's fault either, right? I mean, it also actually, almost all leaders now say it's because of climate, because then It's not, we didn't do anything wrong. In Germany, for instance, when we had that flood last year, it's not implausible that climate had a part in that. But it's very, very clear that the main reason why so many people died in Germany and Belgium was because the alarm systems didn't work. And this was plainly the local leaders in Germany. Now, if I'm stuck here and basically have caused the death of 200 people, would I rather say, yeah, that's on me, or would I say climate?
And all the time.
It's just such an easy scapegoat.
I don't want to place it all on the journalist, I think, because there's a lot of, if I were to think about, what did you call it, front page thought, there's a lot of really narratives that result in the destruction of the human species. So nuclear war, pandemics, all that kind of stuff. It seems like climate is a sticky one. So the fact that it's sticky means there's other interests at play, like you guys are talking about, in terms of politics, all that kind of stuff. So it's not just the journalists. I feel like journalists will try anything for the front page, but it won't stick unless there's bigger interests at play for which these narratives are useful. So journalists will just throw stuff out there and see if it gets clicks, and it's like a first spark, maybe. It's maybe a tiny catalyst of the initial steps, but it has to be picked up by the politicians, by interest groups, and all that kind of stuff. Let me ask you, Bjorn, about the first part of the subtitle: how climate change panic costs us trillions. How does climate change panic cost us trillions?
So we're basically deciding to make policies that'll have fairly little impact, even in 50 or 100 years, that literally cost trillions of dollars. So, I'll give you two examples. So the European Union is trying to go to net zero. So our attempt to go halfway there by 2030 will cost about $1 trillion a year. And yet the net impact will be almost unmeasurable by the end of the century. Why is that? That's because the EU and the rich countries is a fairly small part of the emissions that are going to come out in the 21st century. Now, we used to be a big part of it. That's mainly because nobody else, it was just the US and Europe and a few others that put out CO2 in the 20th century. So we used to be big, but in the 21st century, we'll be a small bit player. And so we're basically spending a lot of money. And remember, $1 trillion is a lot of money that could have been spent on a lot of things that could have made humanity better, on something that will only make us tiny bit better. Now, it will do some good, but the reasonable estimates is if you do a cost-benefit analysis, and again, technically it's really, really complicated, but the basic idea is very, very simple. You just simply say, what are all the costs on one side, and what are all the benefits? So the costs are mainly that we have to live with more expensive energy. You have to.
But I have a feeling for a lot of people that what this guy's saying right now won't make a dent to them. It's like, but we have no choice. Who cares what it costs? We have to do it. Our survival is at stake.
Forego some opportunities.
You can't do a cost-benefit analysis with the planet.
You have to have more complicated services, that kind of thing. The benefit is that you cut carbon emissions, and that eventually means that you'll have less climate damage, you'll have lower temperature rises, and so on. If you try to weigh up all of those, it's reasonable to assume that the EU policies will deliver for every dollar you spend, it'll deliver less than $1, probably about 30 cents back on the dollar, which is a really bad way to spend dollars, because there's lots of other things out in the world where you could do multiple. So for instance, if you think about tuberculosis or education of small kids, or nutrition for small kids, and those kinds of things, every dollar you spend will do like $30 to $100 worth of good. So there are much better places where you could spend this money. Likewise, the US is thinking of going net zero by 2050. It's not actually going to happen, but it's sort of a thing that everybody talks about. Biden is talking a lot about it. If you look at the models that indicate how much will that cost, it's not implausible that this will cost somewhere between $2 and $4 trillion per year by mid-century. And remember, if the U.S. went carbon neutral.
Oh, thanks. Justin Meyer actually got the spreadsheet out and did it. Assuming 20% rate of increase, that won't happen, but suggests that the 50-year estimate isn't unreasonable. Okay, but what my point is, Justin, that this is brilliant because it is very falsifiable. In fact, I encourage you, Justin, or any other global warming alarmist, to actually, starting today, find the estimate or find what the sea level rise was last year. Get a big piece of paper, stick it on your wall, and every year mark in what the sea level rise was each year. And then look at it. Most people won't do this, but it'd be kind of fun. And then just look at it for over the last 10 years, into the future, but now looking back and say, am I seeing 20% increase each year? It's very falsifiable, right? Now, if we are, I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'm saying if it does happen, then you can say, I am justified to being a little alarmed here. But if we don't see that, then you can back off and say, oh, okay, it only rose 5% that year. Oh, that year it was flat. Oh, that year it actually went down. Oh, that year it would jump 30%. And then, whatever it does, you have a good markers for your own personal sanity.
Today, by the end of the century, that would reduce temperatures by about 0.3 degree Fahrenheit. So you would just be able to measure it. It probably wouldn't in real life, but you'd just be able to measure it. Again, this is not saying that there's not some good coming out of it, but you're basically spending an enormous amount.
If only professionals did that. Well, I understand the professionals do that, but the thing is, if people were to do that on their own, I think would greatly help. Instead of looking back all the time, or just have these markers in your life, and that you yourself personally fill in the spreadsheets yourself.
Money on fairly small benefits. So that's my main point.
Yeah, this reminds me of what we were saying earlier about the things that models don't integrate and the things that cost benefit leave out because you really can't go there. One of the issues facing the world right now is the reality that we're reminded of, that energy availability is a geopolitical destabilizer. If you have uneven access to energy.
Well, did you guys hear that? I don't know if it's true or not, but they got positive net energy from fusion. If that's true, that could be a game changer.
And you have Vladimir Putin coming into office or something else happening that disrupts that system. You're vastly increasing poverty. This is playing out across the world. Fertilizer prices. Fertilizer comes from gas, natural gas. If you can envision a world later in the century where we're no longer beholden on this material in the ground, at least fossil fuels, cobalt and lithium for batteries, that's pretty cool. Because you're taking away geopolitical instability, and you don't. But that's not factored in, right? That's like way outside of what you would factor in.
Yes.
But it does feel like to me, if I was going to make the case for, you can choose your trillions, whatever that investing big.
Some people said they heard that too. Like if the world couldn't go, a lot of people don't think we can't just rely on technology, but technology is the only way I think the problem of climate change is going to be solved. I honestly don't think, for practical reasons, I mentioned China, all those other countries, to get the whole world on board, yeah, really, you think that's going to happen? To do it fast enough, yeah, really, you think that's going to happen? I think the best bet's through technology. And if fusion actually, I am very skeptical, but if that actually can work, the sun does it, you need so much power to fuse atoms together. But if we can do it, I mentioned this to my daughter as soon as I heard it, and she was fearful, like anything to do with, you say the word fusion or nuclear energy, like even people get alarmed about that, and I don't get it. Like we have solutions. Nuclear energy is amazing. But so many people are so alarmed by it. Sure, the Russians and the Japanese have made mistakes. But come on. It's clean energy. We'll get Tesla, we get Elon Musk to take those used bars of isotopes and just blast them into space. Let some aliens deal with it.
Isn't for these marginal things. It's for looking at the big picture, a world of abundant energy that doesn't come from a black rock or a gooey liquid that when you burn it creates.
But isn't that what the proposals are? Is investing in different kinds of energy, renewable energy? So
but I don't think most people are making that case.
What's in the trillion in the T costs? What's incorporated? What are the big costs there?
So the big cost is that you have slightly lower productivity gains. So basically, again, and this is sort of the opposite of what we just talked about climate change. We're going to get richer and richer in the world. This is all models, also the UN. This is really the only way that you can get big climate changes, because everybody gets a lot richer. So also the developing world gets a lot richer. So we're likely to get richer. But one of the things that drive wealth production is the fact that we have ample and cheap and available energy. If you make that
and where is this ample, cheap energy? It's in fossil fuels. I remember in the 80s and 90s, people being alarmed that we will run out of fossil fuels. But I'm not sure where the reserves are today, but I think we have centuries and centuries and centuries of fossil fuels left. Maybe even millennia. And the technology is getting better and better to get that oil and gas, how is clean energy going to compete against the cheap fossil fuel energy?
Slightly harder, which is what you do with climate legislation, because you're basically telling people you have to use a source of energy that you would rather not have used, because if people wanted to do it, we'd already have solved the problem. So you basically tell
not a good idea to shoot waste now. I was kind of being facetious. Like, can you imagine putting the spent rods in a rocket and then it blowing up in the atmosphere? Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
you got to use this wind turbine instead of this natural gas plant, or that kind of thing. It's not that you suddenly become poor or anything. It simply makes production slightly harder. What do you do when the wind is not blowing, kind of thing? And of course, we have lots of ways to somewhat mitigate that, but it's a little more costly, a little more complicated, a little less convenient, and that means you grow a little less. That's the main problem with these policies, that it simply makes you somewhat less well off.
So energy becomes more inefficient.
Yes.
So let me.
Yeah, like with solar panels, for example. How many people would have bought solar panels for their house if there was zero subsidies? How many people would have bought a Tesla if they didn't get the $7,500 tax credit? I don't know the answer to this, but my guess is that it'd be a significant percentage that would not have chosen those without the government subsidizing it. Now, then the question has to be asked, why are there subsidies for solar? Because it's not quite competitive to traditional forms of energy. And I'm against subsidies in the oil and gas industry as well. But still, if they're both subsidized and people are still choosing the fossil fuels, that tells you something. That solar is not giving you a good bang for your buck compared to fossil fuels. And for obvious reasons too, like on a cloudy day, you get less energy or none.
Challenge you here. Try to steel man some critics. So you have critics. I would love you to take it seriously and sort of consider this criticism and try to steel man their case. There's a bunch. I could mention this list of criticisms from Bob Ward in London School of Economics. I don't know if you're familiar with him. But
yeah, they just started a new section here: economic models, climate change policies, public opinion, U.S. presidents. Oh, hurricanes. Yeah, I wanted to listen to that one. This is for you, Uberscheiser. You live in Florida.
Let me add one more on top of the pile of the worst case analysis. So what people talk about, which is hurricanes and earthquakes. Is there a connection that's well understood between climate change and the increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes and earthquakes?
I've dug in on both a lot. The earthquake connection to climate change, I'm not worried about compared to just the earthquake risk that we live with in many parts of the world already. The Himalayas, even with that earthquake in 2015 in Kathmandu, that whole range is overdue for major earthquakes. And what has happened in the last...
It's overdue. At what point is California going to fall into the Pacific? At what point is Yellowstone going to blow up? I mean, forget about global warming for a second. The planet is trying to kill us in other ways.
Last 50 years since they last had big earthquakes, huge development, big cities, a lot of informal construction, like the stuff I wrote about in Istanbul, where the family builds another layer and another, they put a floor on every time someone gets married and has kids. You put another floor in your house. And unfortunately, that's, what was the term? This Turkish engineer, rubble in waiting.
Rubble in waiting.
It's rubble in waiting. And we're looking at it, videotaping it. And there are people playing there. So I don't worry about
Answer Lex's question, though.
Earthquake connection to climate change. The hurricanes I've written about for decades. And the most illuminating body of science that I've dug in on, literally, related to hurricanes is this field that's emerged. It gets a tiny bit of money compared to like climate modeling. It's called paleotempestology. It's like paleontology, Mm-hmm. They look for evidence of past hurricanes along coasts that we care about. And they dig down into the lagoons behind like the Barrier Beaches along Florida or the Carolinas or in Puerto Rico. And what you have is a history book of past hurricanes. So there's this mud, accumulating over centuries. And then there's a layer of sand and seashells. And what that indicates is that there was a great storm that came across the beach, pushed a lot of sediment into the mud. And then there's mud. And when you look at that work, I first wrote about this in 2001 in the Times, a long story. And then I've kept track of these intrepid scientists putting these core tubes down. And it shows you that we're in a landscape where big, bad hurricanes are not, they're the norm. But something that's rare and big is something that's extreme. When you think about the word extreme, right, it means it's at the end of the spectrum of what's possible. They're rare in human timescales. Hurricane Michael, 4 years ago, devastated. Category 5 came ashore in the panhandle of Florida, leveled that
He
much.
still hasn't answered the question, though, yet, has he? The question by Lex is basically something about what's the research, what's the science on the correlation between climate change and hurricanes?
Photographed town, Mexico Beach. And people actually, the Tallahassee National Weather Service said unprecedented hurricane. And the damage was unprecedented because there hadn't been a community there before. But the hurricane was not unprecedented at all. If you look at the history, and this is published research, it's just that no one bothers to, we have this blind spot for the longer time scale you need to examine if you're thinking about big, bad things that are rare. And hurricanes are still rare. I was recently covering Fort Myers, the awful devastation. There's a young climate scientist at Florida Gulf Coast University, Joe Muller, who's done that paleotempestology work there, right in Fort Myers. She lives there, and she was away in London at a meeting of reinsurance companies that reinsure all the world's big bad risks when this was happening. But she has done the work that shows it's a 1,000-year record of past hurricanes, and it's super sobering when you consider how fast people have moved into Florida and built vulnerably in an area that hurricanes will hammer. That's part of the fundamental dynamics of the Gulf of Mexico, and these storms come off of Africa. It's a place where they will come. Now, the question of global warming impact is subtle. There are aspects of hurricanes that haven't changed. There's aspects like rainfall that seem pretty powerfully linked to global warming. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, so when you have a big disturbance like the heat engine of a hurricane comes through it, you get more rain. There's rapid intensification. You know how quickly these storms jump from category 1 to 5 or 4 before they hit is a new area of science. So I think it's still early days in knowing, because no one was looking for that.
Yeah, see, this is where Lex and I are much different. I don't think I would have let this guy ramble on for this long.
There were no data back 300 years ago, when these big bad previous hurricanes came, to know whether they were rapidly intensified or not. So
what's his answer so far? What I've gathered, that the question is there a link between climate change and hurricanes? And his answer is maybe, but we really don't know, but we are more confident about rainfall. Is that his answer?
As a journalist, I try to, keep track of what we don't know, not be too constrained, and think about new science as being, robust, unless it's considering and actually actively stating we don't really know.
By the way, is it too loud? I'm going to turn him down a bit.
What's going on with earlier hurricanes. And all of that is swamped, ultimately, literally, by the vulnerability, building vulnerability in these areas. If there's a marginal change in a storm and you've quadrupled or sextupled how much stuff and how many people are in the way, and if some of those people are poor and vulnerable or elderly and can't swim, you're creating a landscape of destruction.
So that's a good point. He's talking to you, Uberscheiser. He's talking about anybody who lives in Florida right now. Because even if hurricanes do become more intense, they lose energy as soon as they hit land, right? So what the heck are you doing living in those areas in the first place? Is it just Disney World? Do you like Mickey Mouse that much? But even Disney World has not been hit that badly, right?
So a lot of the human suffering that has to do with storms is about where and how you build versus the frequency and the intensity of storms. Still, you didn't quite answer
See?
the question.
Lex, why didn't you interrupt him?
When I'm having a beer with people at a bar and they say, hey, why are you having a beer? We're all going to die because of climate change. Usually what they bring up, and I'm just trying to add some levity.
No, this is good.
I actually read a paper. I skimmed a paper a couple weeks ago, and I tried to find it here on my hard drive, but I couldn't find it. I thought I saved it, but I didn't. And it showed that basically what this guy said, that there really isn't a strong correlation between climate change and the frequency of hurricanes. But I'm not so sure about the intensity. Now, that paper could be wrong, but that's what I read. And this is sort of what this guy is saying. But Lex is going to rephrase, I'm sure, and see if he can get a direct answer.
Usually what they bring up is, the hurricanes and the most recent hurricane, saying like this, they're getting crazy. Hurricanes all the time. They're getting more intense, more frequent, and so on. And is there, I'm sure there's incredible science going on trying to look at this. Is there evidence, and is it possible to have evidence that there's a connection between what we can call global warming and the increased frequency?
Yeah, that's a very poorly worded question. Is it possible? Of course, almost anything's possible. The question is, have scientists found a correlation where the R squared is pretty high between climate change and hurricanes, and either intensity or frequency?
Intensity of storms.
No.
And no, thank you.
Oh, he finally answered. He got the memo. He spoke for 5 minutes and then he finally answered no.
Between what we can call global warming and the increased frequency and intensity of storms.
No.
And no, thank you.
Well,
Next question.
you added intensity. It's
See, this guy.
Let me just get into
I think
this.
he's referring to the same paper I read, and I didn't get it from him. But yeah, from my understanding, you can't say, well, I follow the science, and the science is that. I think the science is inconclusive on this one.
Tiny bit more. I mean, hurricanes. I grew up with them in Rhode Island in my youth, and there was a very active period of hurricanes in New England in the 50s and 60s, 70s, and then in the North Atlantic generally was very, very active. When I was a kid, and the dynamics of them forming off of Africa and coming here, circling up the coast, was just prime time. Then there was like what Kerry Emanuel, who
Noah Winslow says this guy's basically calling the consensus liars. No, no, I don't think so. Now, he might be misinformed, but his job is to look at all the boring stuff that people don't want to look at and report it to the public. That's his job. He's a journalist, a science journalist. Now, he could be wrong, but I think he's saying that I've looked at all the research on this topic and it's inconclusive. Well, he said no. Well, yeah, it's the same thing as saying it's inconclusive, because the question was, is there correlation there?
most experienced hurricane climate scientist around at MIT. He's in this story. He's in my 1988 article. He and colleagues have found, and others, that there's what they call a hurricane drought from like the 70s through about 1994 in the Atlantic, specifically the Atlantic basin. And there's been a lot of questions about that. People thought it was ocean circulation, something about the currents. There are these multi-decadal variabilities in the oceans, right? And then now it looks robustly, I can't find a climate scientist who disagrees that the thing that caused the drought was pollution, smog. And significantly in Europe. And you say, well, how did smog and
Whoa. The unintended positive consequences of pollution. Fewer hurricanes. And he couldn't find a scientist to disagree with that theory. Whoa. This is why I ask questions like, could there be unintended positive net consequences of climate change? And it boggles my mind when people are, you shouldn't even ask that question.
in Europe relate to hurricanes crossing the Atlantic and getting to the United States. It's because of the smog was changing the behavior of the Sahara Desert, which is just south of Europe. And the Sahara Desert kills hurricanes. Sand and dust coming off the Sahara. You can see this every year. When that's active, it stifles these big storms. At the point right in their nursery, they all form. There's this area for hurricanes off of West Africa. That's like the nursery zone. And so if you're stifling those hurricanes because of pollution in Europe before the Clean Air Act's kind of cleanups, and then that goes away, none of that has anything to do with global warming. It's another kind of forcing in the climate system, a local one that created a regional dynamic that created a quiet period when all these friends in the bar were maybe they were born.
If this is true, this is really interesting.
In the 90s or whatever. They grew up in an area of where no hurricanes weren't a big deal. And now we have an end to that drought because we cleaned up the air pollution, the sooty kind of air pollution, sulfury. And anyone who says global warming without saying, well, that's in there too, is kind of missing that. And when you look globally, there's still, I think, was it 90 or so hurricanes a year, cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons globally. That hasn't changed. The number of these tropical storms that reach that ferocity has not changed.
Yeah. So, but my guess is the real question that people are going to ask then is, what about intensity? So hopefully he talks about that. But 90 hurricanes worldwide a year, is that what he said? That's a lot, right? I don't think I would have guessed it would be that high. But that would be another thing to put in a spreadsheet. Like, not just rely on scientists, but actually, okay, well, you got to rely on media. There's a hurricane reported here and here and here, and you just put in your spreadsheet every year and just count for yourself how many hurricanes every year. And then ask yourself, if you think that, okay, climate change causes more hurricanes, you can, look at my spreadsheet, and it really hasn't, or it really did. You can see for yourself.
The fundamental dynamic of, and by the way, on the long time scale, the models still indicate as you warm the planet, and remember the Arctic warms quicker. This is something people probably understand. You're actually evening out the imbalance between the heat at the equator and the cold in the northern part of the hemisphere. And that calms the whole system down. So there could be fewer hurricanes.
Hey, Ubersheiser, are you listening to this? This is good news for Florida. If nobody does anything about climate change, you'll have less hurricanes in Florida. That's what he's implying, right? Which makes sense. He's being very reasonable here. What causes hurricanes is temperature imbalances and moisture and cold air, warm air. And if the whole planet's more or less this, or more equal in temperature, you might have less disturbing weather. I think that's what he's saying, right? I don't know if he's right or not.
In the century because of global warming. And for me, that's a lot of information, but if I'm in a bar, I start with what do you care about? You care about safety. You care about security. You care about having everybody safe, not just you. You get in your car and you can evacuate. What about the old person, or the poor family who can't do that? They're not going to leave their house. What are we doing to limit vulnerability now? I circle back to that.
Captain Death says, say what? This dude is cray-cray. What makes you think he's cray-cray? He could be wrong, but he does this for a living. He reads scientific papers for a living and reports on them.
Over and over again. I have like a pocket card. I have this graphic card I created about risk. And like what we really care about is climate risk. Like who's at risk? What's driving the risk? How do you reduce that? It's card. You can almost pull it out in a bar. I should print them.
You should do that.
It's like a risk. Risk is the hazard. Risk is the hazard. Like, the hazard is a storm times exposure. How many people, how much stuff, factoring in vulnerability or resilience. And climate change is changing the hazard for some things, not for tornadoes, not for everything. Exposure is this expanding bullseye. This is another hashtag, expanding bullseye. Get out there and look for that, and you'll see I'm pushing these two geographers who do this for every hazard: wildfire, earthquake, flood, coastal storm. And we're building an expanding bullseye in an area, and nature's throwing darts. Some of the darts are getting bigger because of global warming. Some of the darts we don't know. What do you do? What do you do? Well, you get out of the way, right? You don't want to be on the dartboard. And that, it just simplifies the whole formula. To me, it's kind of a transformational potential to go into a bar. Maybe I should print these things.
100%. And I
should
should
be
go
coasters.
drinking with you more
They
often.
should be coasters in bars.
Yeah.
Because that was fascinating about smog. And I mean, it's nice to be reminded about how complicated and fascinating the weather system is.
Yes, that I think Lex hit the nail on the head here. The takeaway from this, that if it's true that pollution in the 70s and 80s caused the hurricane drought over the Atlantic, it just shows you how complicated the climate system is. They talk about Greta Thunberg here. Let's see what they say about her. You guys, everybody knows who she is, right? She's become a meme.
You'll remember those.
Can you steel man the case of Greta, who's a representative of alarmism, that we need that kind of level of alarmism for people to pay attention and to think about climate change? So you said the singular view is not the correct way to look at climate change, just the emissions. But for us to have a discussion, shouldn't there be somebody who's really raising the concern? Can you steel man the case for alarmism, essentially? Or is there a better term than alarmism? Communication of like, holy shit, we should be thinking about this.
So I think, I totally understand why Greta Thunberg is doing what she's doing. I have great respect for her because if, I look at a lot of kids growing up and they're basically being told, you're not going to reach adulthood, or at least you're not going to get very far into adulthood. And that, of course, this is the meteor hurtling towards Earth. And then this is the only thing we should be focusing on. I understand why she's making that argument. I think it's, at the end of the day, it's incorrect, and I'm sure we'll get around to talking about that. And one of the things is, of course, that her whole generation, I can understand why they're saying, if we're going to be dead in 12 years, why would I want to study? Why would I really care about anything? So I totally want to sort of pull Greta and many others out of this end of the world fear, but I totally get why she's doing it. I think she's done a service in the sense that she's gotten more people to talk about climate, and that's good because we need to have this discussion. I think it's unfortunate, and this is just what happens in almost all policy discussions, that they end up being sort of discussions from the extreme groups, because it's just more fun on media to have sort of the total deniers and the people who say we're going to die tomorrow, and it sort of becomes that discussion. It's more it's more sort of a mud wrestling fight.
So would you think the mud wrestling fight is not useful, or is useful for communication, for effective science communication on one of the platforms that you're a fan of, which is Twitter?
Yeah, I wrote a piece recently on my Sustain What column saying if you go on there for the entertainment value of seeing those knockdown fights, I guess that's useful if that's what you're looking for. The thing I found Twitter invaluable for, but it's a practice. It's just like the workouts you do, or, it's how do I put this tool to use today, thinking about energy action in poor communities. How do I put this tool today, learning about what really happened with Ian, the hurricane, who was most at risk, and how would you build forward better? I hate build back.
Stephanie McGuire says, is this talk about climate change with Greta Thunberg? Is it the same as telling a child they're going to hell if they don't get saved? Same fear mongering. I do think there are similarities, but I think some people would say, but it's real fear mongering. I mean, it's a real fear. Like hell is make believe, but this isn't. Earth is a real place. But the question is, what is the best motivator for human action? Can someone rely on fear alone to get things done? I think for some people it's a great motivator, but for other people like me, if you tell me, I'll be very honest with you about my personality type. If you tell me you better do X because if you don't, Y will happen, and Y is really, really bad, my initial reaction to you will be, get out of here. Don't use that tactic on me. Don't try to manipulate me using fear. because it came from Christianity. I hated it back then, and I hate it now. You either have to do X, or so many people are going to die, and that will be blood on your hands. If that's the type of rhetoric you're going to use, I'll say, well, then let's all fry together, shall we? Like, that's how repulsive that is to me. So there has to be a better way to motivate people rather than just using fear. And I think this Greta Thunberg person, it relies on fear. Like, wake up, people. Don't you see what's happening? We're all going to die. Maybe not in 50 years, but if we don't change, 500 years, the planet will be gone. I don't know what she says, but it's probably something like that.
Or you can go there and just watch it as an entertainment value. That's not going to get the world anywhere.
You don't think entertainment, I wouldn't call it entertainment, but giving voice to the extremes isn't a productive way forward. It seems to, to push back against the main narrative, it seems to work pretty well in the American system. We think politics is totally broken, but maybe that works, that like oscillation back and forth. You need a Greta, and you need somebody that pushes back against Greta to get everybody's to get everybody's attention. The fun of battle,
right,
over time creates progress.
Well, and this gets to the, people who focus on communication science. I'm not a scientist. I write about this stuff. If you're going to try to prod someone with a warning,
yeah,
this is 3 years apart. Nuclear winter.
We'll talk about that.
Global warming. Well, yeah, we'll talk about it. But look at that. This is 3 years apart in the covers of the magazine.
Yeah.
And but then you have to say to what end? If you're not directing people to a basket of things to do, and if you want political change, then it would be to support a politician. If you want energy access, it would be to look at this $370 billion the American government just put into play on climate and say, well, how can my community benefit from that? And I've been told over and over again by people in government, Jigar Shah, who heads this giant loan program in the energy department, he says, what I need now is like 19,500 people who are worried about climate change, maybe because Greta got them worried. But here's the thing you can do. You can connect your local government right now with these multi-million-dollar loans so you can have electric buses instead of diesel buses. And that's an action pathway.
I just looked up, I fact-checked myself. Maybe someone's made a comment in the live stream chat and I missed it. But earlier I said that there's probably centuries of oil left. But it looks like 50 years of oil left, or maybe a little bit more, based on current use. But the less you use, the longer it will last, of course. Let me get like 3 different sources at least. Which is surprising to me. But if that's true, I think that'd be good news, right? The sooner fossil fuels are done with, the sooner other forms of energy has to take its place. Oh, here we go. Oil's 51 years, coal 114 years. Natural gas 53 years. One could make the argument, I'm not making this argument, I'm just saying one could make the argument that we should burn as much fossil fuels as we can right now so there's no choice. I can just see the faces of some people turning red and their blood pressure rising.
Alarm for the sake of getting attention or clicks, to me, is not any more valuable than watching an action movie.
And again, I think also it very easily ends up sort of skewing our conversation about what are the actual solutions. Because yes, it's great to get rid of the diesel bus, but probably not for the reason people think. It's because diesel buses are really polluting in the air pollution sense.
Right.
But I love the smell. I love the smell of diesel in the morning. Don't you guys? I mean, I was raised on the farm, and if I don't smell diesel in the morning, my day will be incomplete.
That is why you should get rid of them.
Right.
And again, if you really wanted to help people, for instance, with hurricanes, you should have better, rules and zoning in Florida, which is a very different outcome. So the mud wrestling fight also gets our attention diverted towards solutions that seem easy, fun, sort of the electric.
Okay, let's go to electric cars. What do they say about electric cars? I can guess. Let me make a prediction. I haven't watched this. They're going to say electric cars are good for the environment, but just barely, because of all the resources and energy used to make batteries. Okay, let's see if I'm right.
Warren Longwick. Okay, let's go there. Let's go electric cars. So, okay, educate us on the pros and cons of electric cars in this complex picture of climate change. What do you think of the efforts of Tesla and Elon Musk on pushing forward the electric car revolution?
So look, electric cars are great. I don't own a car, but I've been driving.
There you go,
Tesla.
socially signaling.
yeah. But I've
We're in Texas.
Well, I
it's okay.
flew in here, so it's not like I'm in any way a virtuous guy on that path. But look, they're great cars, and eventually electric cars will take over a significant part of our driving, and that's good because they're more effective. They're probably also going to be cheaper. There's a lot of good opportunities with them, but it's because they've become reified as this thing that you do to fix climate. And right now, they're not really all that great for climate. They you need a lot of extra material into the batteries, which is very polluting, and it's also it emits a lot of CO2. A lot of electric cars are bought as second cars in the U.S. So we used to think that they were driven almost as much as a regular car. It turns out that they are more likely driven less than half as much as regular cars. So 89% of all Americans who have an electric car also have a real car that they use for the long trips, and then they use the electric car for the short trips.
What do they call it? Electric car anxiety or range anxiety is a real thing. And that exists, like if you take a long trip with a fossil fuel car, you have that as well. But I've heard that it's way more serious with electric cars. Like I can't imagine driving a Tesla from Arizona to Manitoba, Canada, and being constantly worried, where's the next charging station? Am I going to make it? And will I have to go 45 miles an hour on the freeway in order to get there? Will I have to wait in line for an hour to charge up? I mean, these questions make me think, I'm driving gas, man. And with gas cars, you can get 40, 50 miles a gallon nowadays. Well, maybe not 50. But there's I think Honda and Toyota make some cars that get 40 miles a gallon easy on the road, right? Yeah, hybrids are the best. They're a good solution. But full electric, it requires so much more planning for long trips. You just can't, let's get up and go and be spontaneous and drive across the country. No. If you have an electric car, you can't do that.
89%?
89, yeah. So the point here is that it's one of these things that become more sort of a virtue signaling thing. And again, look, once electric cars are sufficiently cheap that people will want to buy them, that's great. And they will do some good for the environment. But in reality, what we should be focusing on is, instead of getting people electric cars in rich countries, where because we're subsidizing typically in many countries, you actually get a sort of sliding scale. You get more subsidy the more expensive it is. We sort of subsidize this to very rich people to buy very large Teslas to drive around.
Yeah, this is a good point. The countries that probably cause the most global warming are not the countries driving electric cars, right?
Whereas what we should be focusing on is perhaps getting electric motorcycles in third world developing cities, where they would do a lot more good. They can actually go as far as you need. There's no worry about running out of them. And they would they're much more polluting, just air pollution wise, and they're much cheaper, and they use very little battery. So it's about getting our senses right. But the electric car is not it's not a conversation about is it technically a really good or is it a somewhat good insight. It's more like it's a virtue signal. So just I work with economists.
Well, it used for Tesla and how it used to be a virtue signal, but not anymore because he bought Twitter. Now driving a Tesla for a lot of people on the left is like, oh, Elon Musk bad, therefore Tesla cars bad. Ugh.
Not an economist, but I like to say I claim I kind of am. But the fundamental point is we would say, well, how much does it cost to cut a ton of CO2? And the answer is for most electric cars, we're paying in the order of 1,000, 2,000. Norway they pay up to $5,000 or thereabouts. Huge amount for 1 ton of CO2. You can right now cut a ton of CO2 for about $14 on the Reggie or something. You can do this.
That's a regional greenhouse gas initiative.
So you can basically cut it really, really cheaply. Why would we not want to cut dozens and dozens of tons of CO2 for the same price instead of just cutting 1 ton? And the simple answer is we only do that because we're so focused on electric.
I may interrupt. Typical European, come here in Texas, tell me I can't have my Ford F-150, but I'll
now you can have your F-150 Lightning.
That's true.
Yes.
I'm just joking. Yes.
No, I know.
But what do you think about electric cars? If we just linger on that moment and this particular element of helping reduce emissions.
Well, you talked about the middle in the beginning, and I loved moving to the hybrid. The Prius was fantastic. It did everything our other sedan did, but it was 60 miles per gallon performance, and you don't have range anxiety because it has a regular engine too. We still have a Prius. We also inherited my dear dad's year 2000 Toyota Sienna, which is an old 100,000 mile minivan, and we use it all the time to do the stuff we can't do in the Prius.
Like what?
Taking stuff to the dump.
Oh, you mean in terms of the size of the vehicle?
Yeah, a size and just convenience factor for a bigger vehicle. I would love a fully electrified transportation world. It's kind of exciting. I think what Elon did with Tesla, I remember way back in the day when the first models were coming out, they were very slick Ferrari style cars. And I thought, this is cool. And, there's a history of privileged markets testing new technologies.
Okay, let's move on to, there was another one I wanted to talk about. Public opinion on climate change. How long is that? 310. That's 20 minutes. That's too long. Advice for young people? There's no young people watching right now, so that's irrelevant. Meaning of life? Let's go to public opinion. We'll listen. If it's interesting, I'll keep it going.
This is 2022 polls. This is a bunch of different ways to look at the same basic effect. In the United States, Democrats, younger Americans identify dealing with climate change as a top priority. U.S. adults, 42% say that dealing with climate change should be a top priority. 11% of Republicans.
I know you can't see it, but why is this happening? Let me blow it up. Democrats, younger Americans identify dealing with climate change as a top policy priority. U.S. adults, 42%. If you lean right, it's only 11. If you lean left, it's 65. And if you're young, it's over 50. And if you're old, it's under 50. What explains that? Don't tell me that the young, left-leaning kids are smarter. That's probably not true. What explains this? Why are we seeing this? Well, here's my take. We're seeing this because of the policies, how it will affect people. I think Republicans see this as this will take away their money. The policies will take away their money. They view it as a transfer of wealth. That would explain it, right? Another way you can explain it, and they mention this, maybe that's why they talk about meaning of life. Young people are leaving religion and now they need something else as a goal. Why is my dog barking? And so if you leave one religion, you find a replacement. And maybe it's like, I want to make the world a better place. That would explain this. And Republicans, young Republicans, there's a lot of evangelicals in the United States. That could explain that. They already have their hope, meaning, and purpose. They don't need a different one. Plus, Jesus is returning soon. So that would explain this. But what about the age thing? I think it's similar. I think kids they're more passionate. They need something to focus their attention on, to make them feel special. So that would explain the age thing. Your dogs are barking now too?
65% of Democrats. And we could see this effect throughout. 46% of Americans say human activity contributes a great deal to climate change. By the way, this is a little bit different than what we're discussing. I was just looking through different polls. In the public, there seems to still be uncertainty about how much humans contribute to climate change, more than the scientific.
It would only be 24% that disagree with the UN climate panel, right? Three quarters would agree.
Are you uncomfortable about the 29?
No, 29 is actually, it's exactly right. I mean,
okay.
The UN doesn't say it's all. Well, they say that could be the border case.
What?
But anyway,
what? The UN says that climate change is not all human? Of course that's true, right?
It's interesting, but to me, across all these...
such things called volcanoes, forest fires. It'd be interesting to know how much CO2 is given off in the atmosphere from one major forest fire in California compared to cars driving in California. I don't know the answer to this, but that would be a fun experiment to try to figure out. Maybe, I'm sure someone's already done that. I'll look it up while they talk.
These polls, if you look Republican versus Democrat, Republican, it's say that 17% say it's a great deal. Democrats say 71% say it's a great deal, and you just see this complete division. I think you probably, with the COVID pandemic, you can ask a lot of questions like this. Do masks work? Are they an effective method to slow transmission of a pandemic? You'll probably have the same kind of polls about Republicans and Democrats. And while the effectiveness of masks to me is a scientific question, but so there's different truths here, apparently. One is a scientific truth. One is a truth held by the scientific community, which seems to be also different than the scientific truth sometimes. And the other is the public perception that's polluted or affected by political affiliation.
Sure.
And then there's whatever is the narrative that's communicated by the media. They will also have the answer to the question of whether masks work or not. And they will also have an answer to the question about all these climate related things. So that's a long way of asking the question of how is politics mixed into all of this on the communication.
By the way, I know this is a bit of a terrible poll because I'm forcing to choose one or the other, because I could have put both and then everybody would have answered both. But this gets to, again, I'm going to guess here. If you lean left, you're going to view CO2 as a pollutant. And if you lean right, you're going to view it as plant food. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Now, I guarantee you there's a lot of left-leaning people who answered plant food. I'm not saying that you didn't answer that, but especially those young Democrats in that poll, if you were to ask a question on the street, the first thing that pops in your head, CO2, pollutant or plant food? They're going to say pollutant. It's killing us. It's saving the plants.
front, on the figuring out what the right policy is front, on the friction of humanity in the face of the right policies.
Well, I've written a ton on this. After I had that conversion about the social science in 2006, I began digging in a lot more on how people hold beliefs and what they do as opposed to what they think, and questions about polling. And there's two things that come to me that make me not worry about the basic literacy, like is climate change X% of whatever. I don't really care about that. And I'll explain why. For one thing, more science literacy, more basic literacy, like what is a greenhouse gas, all that stuff. Dan Kahan, Kahan at Yale, he's actually at Yale Law School. The last decade, he did all this work on what he calls cultural cognition, which is, and he did studies that showed
the March edition of Popular
how what you believe emerges based on culture, based on your background, your red, blue, your where you are in the country. And one of the really disturbing findings was that the people who have the most basic science literacy, like who know the most about greenhouse effect or whatever, they're at both ends of the spectrum of views on climate, dismissives and alarmed. Mm-hmm. Steve Koonin, as I mentioned, is a good example. He's brilliant.
See, that tells you something. You guys are drifting off, I know, but he just said that the people who are the most educated on climate change are on both sides of the spectrum of alarmists. We need to move fast and quickly, more doomsday, to dismissive. We're going to be okay. Why is that? How can people have the exact same evidence and facts in front of them? You can have two people who know exactly the same amount about climate change, and let's say that amount is huge. They're well educated in it. Why does one person lean alarmist and one person lean dismissive?
Physicist, and he knows all the science, and he's completely at the end of skepticism. Will Happer, who was close to being Trump's science advisor, was even more out there. And they're both on the Jason committee that advises the government on big strategic things. And people who are really alarmed about it also have the same belief. So as a journalist, I was thinking, do I just spend my time writing more explanatory stories that explain the science better? No. Do I dig in on this work to understand what brings people together? And then these same surveys, the same science shows you.
Guy Montag says urgency is an emotional response. So your theory is that depending on how emotional you are, you'll be alarmist. And if you're not emotional, you'll be dismissive. That would explain it. Well, and that's precisely why I put that poll up. Like if you're human, the nature of your personality is one of not just climate change, but you find yourself worrying about everything. Fascism. If you're worried about that, every day. Our democracy is coming to an end. If you're worried about that every day, or maybe not every day, but often. I think you're right. I think you might lean more emotional and personality type.
Thinking about climate, among other things, this becomes, you don't have to worry about this anymore. If you Google for no red, blue.
Nathan, if you're still here, I'm willing to put up that, was it Potlucker something? You had a link. Can you repost it? Because I lost it, sorry. But I'm willing to play some of that too.
Divide climate Revkin. You'll find a piece I did with some really good graphs. Essentially,
or if somebody else knows what he posted, you can repost it. I think I'll be able to, it won't go to spam, I don't think.
Shows that in America, this is the Yale group again, their climate communication group. There's no red-blue divide on energy innovation, none. We need more climate energy, clean energy innovation. There wasn't even a divide country by state on whether CO2 should be regulated as a pollutant. But it's all like, what are the questions you ask? If you ask about innovation, if you ask about more incentives for renewable power, Oklahoma, Iowa, I did a piece when I was at ProPublica showing that the 17 states that were fighting Obama in court over his...
No, it wasn't Pocket Locker. It was something else. I know who Pocket Locker is. Did anybody remember? I think Nathan's gone. But remember that link he posted? I think he posted it to show like the opposite side of what we're listening to. Although I think these guys have been pretty moderate down the middle. I don't think they're on the dismissive side at all.
Our plan. We're actually...
Oh, Potholer 54. Thank you, Noah. Let me see if I can find it.
Majority of them were actually meeting the targets that the Clean Power Plan had because they're expanding wind power already. Not because of the climate, because it makes money sense and energy sense.
So you don't think there's a political divide in this?
There is on climate if you call it climate. If you say it's a climate, do you believe in the climate crisis? You're not asking what kind of energy future do you want in your town? And so if you ask that question, the polarization goes away.
I guess what I'm asking, is there polarization on policy?
No, well, there, again, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last November, that was bipartisan. All of Congress said yes. And that's $1 trillion, several hundred billion of which are for cleaner energy and resilience.
Yeah, but Potholer has a whole bunch of stuff on climate, so I don't know which one he wanted me to watch. No, I don't want to watch the Thunderfoot one on the electric truck, but the video was, if ocean levels are rising, why can't we see it? Okay, thanks, Justin. Let's see if I can find it.
But it's not a climate bill, and it wasn't a tax. It's incentives.
So the word climate and similar words are just used as part of the signaling, like masks. It's
absolutely.
It's not.
Dan Kahan's work, the guy at Yale,
okay.
He really demonstrated powerfully.
I found it. This is what Nathan wanted me to watch. Okay, it starts out with a picture.
Those who are skeptical about the rise in sea level caused by global warming, here are some scientific predictions that were made.
So we were told sea levels would rise and we'd have to evacuate the coasts. Let's take a look here. Sydney Harbor, 100.
See, this is good. I like this because this is what everybody should see for themselves. You don't have to rely on scientists or anything. You just, this was, I'm sure he'll say when this picture was taken, but here clearly it's gone up.
40 years.
But then again, I ask questions like, is there a tide? Is this at exactly same time of the day?
88. He predicted that within 30 years, i.e. this year, lower Manhattan would be underwater.
And here's how scientists measure that sea level rise.
Just there. Just here. It's gone up by about a millimetre. Rising sea level. You got it? I've got it. 3 mil.
Well, no prizes for guessing. This isn't how they measure sea level rise, and these aren't scientific predictions. They're just what bloggers and pundits think scientific predictions and measurements are, because when they do their own research, they don't check scientific studies to find out.
This is Nathan in the UK. I'm joking, Nathan.
They just get their information from other TV shows, books, newspaper
This is
columnists, and bloggers. We'll take a look at the real scientific predictions and how sea level rise is being measured later in the video.
Good.
Why do the critics do it? Well, of course, it's a very old tactic, taking a leaf out of the creationist manual. Invent your own science, create your own scientist, even.
Yeah, I agree so far. Don't listen to the predictions from journalists or the media. Listen to the predictions of the scientists.
Make his claims as stupid as possible.
See, I think what you must remember is that as true scientists, we are constantly searching for evidence. Prove that which we already believe to be truth.
And then amaze your audience with your skill in demolishing them. So if the science critics aren't explaining what the science says, where do you go? The same place real scientists go when they want to look at the latest discoveries in their field, respected, peer-reviewed scientific journals. And if you find these rather daunting, then get your information from reputable science media where these studies are accurately reported and cited. Now, you may not trust or believe the studies. Maybe you think they're part of a huge worldwide conspiracy, but at least you'll know what they actually say.
Was that the one I showed?
Now, you may not trust or believe the studies. Maybe you think they're part of a huge worldwide
No, that's a different one.
conspiracy, but at least you'll know what they actually say instead of relying on spurious blogs and news pundits to misinform you about what they say. Before we look at the fallacies, let's start with the basics. Why are sea levels rising and expected to rise further as the Earth heats up?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question and see if I'm right. This is a quiz for Pine Creek. Why are sea levels rising? Because of the melting of the polar ice caps, number one. And number two, because of the expansion of water due to heat.
The most obvious reason is that higher temperatures mean more ice is melting, which I'm sure makes perfect sense even to people who never studied science.
How long will it take for the sea level to rise 2 feet? I mean, think about it. If your ice cube melts in your glass, it doesn't overflow. It's displacement. I mean, this is the thing. Some of the things that they're talking about mathematically and scientifically don't make sense.
Okay, they don't make sense to one person who never studied science. So for Congressman Stockman's benefit, I'll explain the physics in words of one syllable, because it really is that simple. Land, ice, melt, fill, rise.
Think about it. If your ice cube melts in your glass, it doesn't overflow.
Yeah,
but the great thing about basic physics is that you can do a lot of the experiments yourself.
But Potlucker guy, what's his name? Potholer. What Potholer guy's saying is true. It's just the ice is falling into this glass. Yeah.
Draining board to represent rise. Knowing something heat system called GRACE constantly records the mass of ice on top of Greenland using a gravitometer. Researchers found that Greenland has been losing around 255 billion tons of ice every year. That means the amount of ice lost through melting and ablation minus the amount gained through precipitation. Melting glaciers are also contributing a huge amount to sea level rise. There are about 200,000 glaciers worldwide, covering roughly 10% of the Earth's surface. Outside of Greenland, glaciers are losing some 200.
Okay, I don't disagree with any of this.
Rise, less well known, is the expansion of water as it gets warmer.
Ding, ding, ding.
The fact that the oceans are getting warmer has been directly measured.
Okay, I only mentioned two things. I'm starting to think that there's another one coming. I mentioned the expansion and the polar ice caps, the glaciers melting. What would be a third reason? Is there a third reason? Is there any other displacements going on? No, I don't think there's a third reason. I hope I'm wrong.
The fact that warming water expands is another well-known principle of physics. And again, you can actually do this experiment yourself to be sure it's not just a conspiracy.
No disagreement there.
Extensive flooding in Pakistan in 2010, sea level actually fell temporarily, but these ups and downs don't change the long-term picture. And sea level is also affected by eustatic changes, movement of the land rising and falling.
Oh, see, I missed that one. Tectonic activity. Yeah. I was on the right track. I was thinking about displacements. Okay.
Failure to understand this eustatic movement has often led to fallacious news reports from Reuters and others claiming ridiculously high rises in sea level.
This area where I'm standing, and actually within a 30-meter radius, used to be completely above the water.
Because in this case, the reporter was unaware that the crustal plate on which he's standing has been subsiding. Scientists, on the other hand, factor these eustatic changes into their measurements. The amount of melting ice from Greenland and glaciers outside Greenland is accelerating at the high end of predictions, and this, combined with a more rapid expansion of...
Okay, this is in millimeters. So we're in... When was this made? 1 year ago. So this can't be a prediction. But he makes it look like the gray is actual... Oh, I guess the study was done in 2017. Okay, so here we have a falsifiable prediction, which is good. This is what you want to see if you're a scientist, to know if your model's good. So this is 2 centimeters. So this would be 1 inch right here, guys. So 1 inch. And so what was that other prediction? 36 inches in 50 years? No, 3 feet in 50 years, which is 36 inches, which is 100. The charting doesn't go that high. Or maybe it's on this side and he's not showing it.
Warmer water has led to an acceleration in sea level rise over the last few decades.
Oh, but that was just from the melting though, right? Not from the expansion?
If we go back to the end of the last glaciation, after a 400 feet rise due to melting ice sheets, there hasn't been much of a change in sea level for the last 3,700 years. This can be determined by taking sediment cores from coastal zones, dating coral growth rates.
It's not just about the tectonic dynamics. When all the weight from the ice is gone, the land rises slightly. Wouldn't that be if the land is rising slightly? And I'm not. Are you sure the land rises slightly? You could be right, but wouldn't that be like a unattended positive consequence of the glaciers melting? They would offset the sea level rise in relation to the land?
That, put together, show a picture of a very small and steady rise of less than a millimetre a year. But during the 20th century, when global temperatures went up significantly, sea level rise more than doubled from 0.8 millimetres a year to 1.9 millimetres a year.
1.9 millimeters a year. I will convert that to inches for you guys. 1.9 divided by 25. That's 0.076. Yeah, and I think the latest data is 0.13 inches.
Rated again to 3.1 millimetres a year. And sea level is currently rising around 3.6 millimetres a year.
Okay, 3.6. 3.6 millimeters divided by 25 millimeters in an inch is 0.14. Yeah, I said 0.13, so I was a little bit off.
So basic physics tells us a hotter climate should be raising sea levels, as we've seen it do in the past. In fact, those who dispute that really need to explain how it's possible that warmer water and melting ice would not cause sea level to rise, but they do raise a legitimate question. If sea level really is rising at over 3 millimetres a year, how come we can't see it in old photos? This photo has been passed around Facebook and Twitter for years.
Oh, I thought this photo was supposed to prove that sea levels were going up, but now he's saying this photo proves that they're not?
Showing, apparently, a rise of 0.0 centimetres in sea levels, in other words, 0. If whoever produced this photo is measuring sea level rise to the nearest 0.1 centimetres, that's a millimetre, it means that he's got eyesight keen enough to determine that the level of water on the right is less than half a millimetre higher than the level of water on the left. Well done to whoever managed that, but that isn't science.
Yeah.
That's called doing your own research.
That's quick and dirty, yeah. So he talks about that.
In the 1960s, they measured more accurately with microwave radar scanners, but these were fixed on land, so it was hard to determine whether the sea was rising or the land.
So
the
he
year before
explains
that,
how they do it.
Going back to 1886, but is part of an area where sea levels are rising a lot slower than other parts of the world, like regions of the United States and Canada.
As if sea level around the U.S. could somehow be different than it is in the rest of the world.
Yes, I know, if you do your own research in a bathtub.
Oh, what?
Regions of the United States and Canada.
As if.
Where did this prediction come from? Change in sea level inches by 2020, 8 inches a year? Yeah, see, this is why I love predictions. Because whoever modeled this, we can say, was wrong. And this is why I love the current predictions that they have of, let's say, 1 foot in 50 years. Because that is so clearly falsifiable. It's either going to be right, it's going to be close, or it's going to be wrong. You can just see it. And then some of you younger people listening right now, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, you can look back on a video like this and say, that model was right, that model was close, or that model was flat wrong.
Sea level around the U.S. could somehow be different than it is in the rest of the world.
Yes, I know, if you do your own research in a bathtub, ocean water should rise at exactly the same rate everywhere. In the science world, even if you believe the rate of rise ought to be evenly distributed, you still have to measure it and find out. And when all the measurements are collected all over the world, this is the picture that emerges. The areas in red are where sea level is rising fastest. In blue, it's rising slowest. Anyway, now that we've seen what the rate is...
Interesting. So Japan, Australia, southeastern China is screwed. That's why they want to immigrate to the United States so badly. Looks like the United States is doing well. Look at all the blue. The United States is the most anal about climate change. Well, no, well, with Biden now it is, but and Europe. But they're the ones the least affected right now. Sea level trends. Blue is low trend. Red is high trend. So the areas that should be acting the quickest or will be the most harmed the soonest are probably the areas that are doing the least. Well, maybe not Australia. But China, really?
Was in the past and what it is now, according to measurements rather than guesses. Let's move on to what it's going to do in the future.
Yes.
Who can we get that information from? Of course, an actor and theatre technician. He should know.
So now 3 millimeters a year, that means in 100 years...
No, you can't work it out in your head, Bill. It's not as if you can simply multiply 3 by 100. These are just a couple of the equations required to estimate thermospheric sea level rise, which is the right...
Yeah, I think this is what Nathan was pushing back on me, but I readily admitted that it's the rate of increase, even if you assume that's going up. That's what you need to do that. So if it is linear, then the predictions that a lot of people are making will be wrong. Yeah, I don't dispute that.
Due to the expansion of warmer water. Then on top of that, you need to apply calculus to work out the response of sea level to past temperature rise, and a whole load more measurements and calculations to work out how much ice will melt from Greenland and thousands of glaciers in response to future atmospheric and ocean temperature rises.
I wish I had a science guy here to check my numbers.
But you can simplify it in the sense of, this is the sea level increase last year. We expect it to go up because of more melting, more heating. What percentage, whatever, you can put in that as a variable. And then you can take, this will be catastrophic if it rises 3 feet. How many years does it take, given that growth rate, to get there? Because at some point, there's going to be no glaciers left. So then it'll be all thermal expansion and maybe displacement of continents. Well, no, that's an offset, though. But still, you can do some basic math and say, okay, well, we know that it's not going to go 1 foot next year up, right? We know it's not going to go up 1 inch next year. So you can actually forecast how many years it takes. So, quick and dirty.
God, you're not really going to just multiply 3 by 100, are you?
We'll be up to...
Don't say 300. Don't say 300.
300 millimeters. No! Why, that's 11.8 inches. That's almost a foot.
Seriously, this is why...
Yeah, the problem is it's hard to model. Of course it's hard to model, but you can still model it and then still check to see if your model is right. And this is what I love. And my instincts tell me, my intuition tells me, which is just my intuitions, that a lot of these models, well, the media has kind of changed things and, always gone with the most tragic, the most sensational type prediction. I'm saying that those will be wrong. Probably the more conservative estimates will be correct, but we'll find out. That's the beauty of this. We'll find out. Well, I might die first, but some of you young ones here will find out.
If I measure the velocity of a stone a fifth of a second after I drop it from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, its velocity would be around 1.96 meters a second. Since the top of the tower is 57 meters high, we're predicting that with that path, temperature, perhaps 6 degrees Fahrenheit higher than it is today, sea level will keep rising for hundreds of years. That means the lives of people 2, 4, or even 10
This is what I was saying the other day. Yeah, I was talking about the lag and the climate inertia. So even if we did, if we all died and there was no humans to produce or burn fossil fuels, and if we even assume cows all died and there's no methane, well, they would die because we can't feed them, and cows are domestic animals. They can't survive on their own. Well, actually, if you let them go free, yeah, they might survive for a while before they eat up all the food, and then there's nothing left for them to eat. Yeah, the Earth would keep warming. And the point of saying that is that if the dire end of the predictions are correct, we're screwed no matter what. We're all going to die. So eat, drink, and be merry.
Generations into the future will depend on the decisions we take now. Now, 3 feet may not seem like much up against a 20-foot tower or a cliff face. That's because these structures are rising vertically. However, along most of the shoreline, the land is sloping or even flat. So there, the 3 feet rise would send seawater dozens or even hundreds of feet inland.
Yes. I actually did this early on. I got my paint out and I showed pictures similar to this. But the thing is, what percentage of the population live within 1 mile of the coast? we did this on last Tuesday. We calculated, or we found out that 40% live within 60 miles of the coast. 40% of the whole world lives 60 miles within the coast. But how about just 1 mile, 2 miles? And then how long does it take for that amount of sea level rise to go 2 miles inland? I don't know the answer to that, but my guess is it's hundreds, if not thousands of years. Even if you assume a non-linear rate of increase, like growth each year.
And unfortunately, flat coastal land and estuaries are precisely where we've decided to build most of our expensive and densely populated infrastructure. But wasn't New York supposed to be already underwater by now? I've been getting comments on the channel from people who really believe this was a scientific prediction. Apparently in 1988...
Yeah, I agree with him here. Like, this is, when you read something from the media predicting something, don't believe it. Although, what does it say here? NASA's top scientist James Hansen said Manhattan is underwater by now. In 1988, Hansen predicted Lower Manhattan would be underwater by 2018. Well, is he a climate scientist? I guess we'll find out.
James Hansen said Lower Manhattan would be underwater by 2018. Wait, no, Hansen said all of Manhattan will be underwater by 2018, and that's supported by an impeccable source, a blog. And as long as we're making stuff up, let's say his prediction was that the whole of New York will be underwater by 2018.
Well, wait a minute. It sounds like he is a climate scientist. Well, let's fact check this before this guy does. James Hansen, climate prediction. 30 years later, deniers are still lying about Hansen's amazing global warming prediction. 30 years ago, James Hansen testified to Congress about the dangers of human-caused climate change. In his testimony, Hansen showed the results of his 1988 study using a climate model to project future global warming under 3 possible scenarios. And I bet you anything he's going to say that he was way off on his most draconian prediction, his most alarmist prediction. The actual 1988 to 2017 temperature increase was about 0.6. Hansen's 1988 global climate model was almost spot on. So he was right about the temperature increase. But it sounds like he was off on sea level rise. Okay, let's see what this potholder guy says.
By 2018. Wait, no, Hansen said all of Manhattan will be underwater by 2018, and that's supported by an impeccable source, a blog. And as long as we're making stuff up, let's say his prediction was that the whole of New York will be underwater by 2018. Better yet, he predicted that the entire city of New York would vanish overnight. And where did he make this prediction, that Lower Manhattan or the whole of New York would be underwater?
Let me guess, he never did.
Water by midnight on December 31st, 2017? Why, it's all over the web, where people go to do their own research. So if this really was a scientific prediction, then why isn't the West Side Highway underwater? To bust the myth, we first have to track down the source. Let's ask someone who always gives his source but never properly reads or fact checks it.
Here's another James Hansen forecast from 1988. He predicted that within 30 years, i.e. this year, Lower Manhattan would be underwater.
Good old Tony Heller. So this wasn't a scientific study at all. It was speculation by Hansen in a magazine. Or was it? No, turns out Salon magazine never even talked to Hansen. They interviewed a journalist, Bob Rice, who was recalling a conversation he had had with Hansen 12 or 13 years earlier for an upcoming book. As Rice remembered it, they were in Hansen's office in Lower Manhattan, and Rice told Salon magazine this.
I went over to the window with him and looked out on Broadway in New York City and said, if what you're saying about the greenhouse effect...
Okay, so it's basically people just making up stuff about what he said.
He got his sums wrong. Since the magazine interview was in 2001, and Rice said his interview with Hansen had been 12 to 13 years earlier, that would mean the prediction was made around 1988. 1988 plus 20 years makes... Too slow, Bill. 2008. Unfortunately, when Watts added 20 to 1988, he mistakenly got 2018. So that date was copied and pasted by other bloggers. When it was Tony Heller's turn to copy the myth, he could see the dates didn't add up.
This sounds like how the New Testament was written.
But the first rule of doing your own research is never question the blogosphere. Once a myth is set in stone, you can't correct it. So Tony decided instead to change the time period that was spelled out in the magazine that he had just read out loud, and that allowed him to dutifully follow the line that Hansen's prediction was for 2018. It's a classic case of changing the evidence to fit the conclusion, even when you know the conclusion is wrong. Don't you just love how the blogosphere works? The funny thing is, Hansen didn't say 20 years or 30 years. Despite being copied on the blogosphere hundreds of times, no one thought to check with Hansen to confirm that's what he actually said, or check with Rice's book to see if Rice had remembered the conversation correctly. As it turned out, he hadn't. Rice later admitted he was being interviewed on the telephone, and he didn't have his notes, so he got the details wrong. After checking with his own book, he said his question was what the view would be like outside the window in 40 years with doubled CO2. So this is what's in the book. Hansen's own recollection of the conversation was exactly the same as the book, that Rice had asked him to speculate on changes that might happen in New York City in 40 years, assuming CO2 doubled in amount. Double CO2 concentration means a doubling from pre-industrial levels of around 265 parts per million.
I got the actual 1988 paper up right now. I'm trying to find if he makes any predictions at all. Well, yeah, he does. He has a model. Short-term, long-term temperature, local changes. So it sounds like he was drinking, didn't have his notes. Someone asked him a question. He gave a wrong answer. People jumped on that and said this is, they're using this as sort of a non-alarmist propaganda. Oh, this is a long paper. Okay, here's the summary. Our model's results suggest that global greenhouse warming will soon rise above the level of natural climate variability. The single best place to search greenhouse effect appears to be the global mean surface air temperature. If it rises and remains for a few years above the appropriate significant level, we have argued it's about 0.4 99% confidence level. It will constitute convincing evidence of cause-effect relationship. Major improvements are needed to understanding the climate system and our ability to predict. We conclude that there is an urgent need for global measurements in order to improve knowledge. Notice urgent need for measurements in order to improve knowledge of climate forcing mechanisms and climate feedback processes. The expected climate changes in the 1990s present at once a great scientific opportunity. Yeah, so he really doesn't go out on a limb at all here. Yeah, this is pretty benign. Yeah, so let this be a lesson. Don't listen to the media. Find the paper for yourself and read it. But I understand, like, who wants to read this? But just do what I did. Read the intro, read the summary. You learn this in English class, right? And then if you don't understand something, then go more into the meat of it. Okay, I think that's enough of that. What have we learned here today? We've learned here today that the science of climate change has gotten tremendously better and that you can understand it really well. Some people understand it really well and disagree on the degree of alarmist or dismissiveness of it and the policies that should be done because of it. That's so incredibly reasonable that that's true. And I think there's this idea amongst a lot of people, and because of that polling data I showed earlier, especially amongst young people who are Democrats, go look at that poll, that they tend to side with or assume that people who are knowledgeable about this, the scientists who actually are making the predictions, are all in the same camp of, alarmist. Got to do something now. And that's probably not true. What else have we learned here? Oh, for me, the biggest takeaway is because climate science has gotten better compared to 1988, we have clear-cut predictions, different scenarios, but we see them. And when you have these type of predictions, they're so easily falsifiable, and that's a good thing. And 5 years is going to come out quickly. 10 years is going to come out quickly. You think that's a long ways off. It isn't. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll look back and see, okay, currently it's at 0.14 inches per year rise. In order for a lot of these sea level predictions to come true, that number has to be way higher 10 years from now. It has to. And if it's still under, let's say, not 0.20 inches by 2050 or whatever, or 2030, we know those predictions were wrong. Easily falsifiable. We also learned here today, what I learned that was new, and if you came late, was that in the, what did he say, in the 1980s, because of pollution in Europe, hurricane activity was basically gone over the Atlantic because of how they were formed with the Sahara Desert. That's weird. That shows you how weird the climate can be, how we have all these offsetting factors. There are predictions going back to the 1950s, Doug. Yeah, but in the 1950s, they didn't have the tech we have now, Captive Desk. And we'll keep getting better, is my guess, but I would trust the predictions today way more than the predictions in 1950, wouldn't you? They have been sounding alarms for as long as I have lived. Have we not been measuring up till now? But who's the they, Franklin? That's another thing we learned here today. The they is not the media or even the journalists. Like this guy here is a journalist. He's not a scientist. This guy is a scientist. But this guy, he was the source for, in this conversation, but his source is the scientist. So he could be wrong. But this is why we have scientific journals and papers, so we can fact check. But your point is good, though, Franklin, in the sense that politicians succumb a lot of times to the will of the people, because it's a democracy. And if the people have been misled, then the politicians will be misled, which means the policy will be misled. Right? The point is you can look at the accuracy of models over time and proportion. Yeah. The thing is, I think what scientists do is they don't tell you what policy should be, though, right? Science is a descriptive thing. It's not a prescriptive thing. A true scientist, a true Scotsman, no true Scotsman, a true scientist will not say, you need to do this. A scientist will say, this is happening. And based on what is happening, this is what we predict what will happen. Now, how the world should react to that, that's up to the people and to the politicians and the dictators and the kings and queens of the world. But yeah, is there a paper in the 50s that predicts sea level rise? Sea level rise, 1950s. I'd be surprised if there was one. But if someone has one, then we can see how accurate it was. Like, I know we have data on how much it did rise, but is there a prediction in the 50s of how much it would rise and then compared to what actually happened? Like, global warming, climate change really wasn't a thing in the 50s. It really only got started in the late 80s, right? Am I wrong about that? But maybe that's only because of my age and what I remember. Yeah, you're right, Captive Desk. It's gotten way better. In the 1960s and 70s, scientists were saying about global cooling. Yeah, well, and he brought this up too, like that Newsweek article. Does anybody want to come in and bark at me? Let me know in the live stream chat. Oh, and tonight at 8 o'clock or 7 Pacific, I'm on my main channel. I'll be talking with Marty. She's a former Mormon. I think she wants to ask me questions. Oil company researchers that were kept under wraps in the 1950s is what I want to Google. Big oil saved us from the new ice age. Thank God for fossil fuels. If it wasn't for fossil fuels, we'd be all frozen over. Oh, I read a paper. This is an interesting thing. I didn't read the paper. I skimmed it. I don't do this for a living, so it's always skimmed. But let's see if I have it. More people die from cold than from heat is the basically summary of that paper. So in other words, a global ice age is way more dangerous than a global warming. And being from Canada, I would tend to agree. I much rather live in Arizona where it's hot, 40 degrees Celsius in the summers, than minus 30 Celsius in the middle of winter in Manitoba. Ugh, horrible. Yeah. A warming planet saves lives. Analysis of millions of deaths in recent decades in numerous countries, published in the British Medical Journal, shows that cooler temperatures killed 9 times to 17 times than warmer temperatures. Remember last week I said, what's a positive benefit of global warming, of climate change? Can you think of any? Well, there's let me bring it up. Let's go straight to the source. If I can find it. Professor Gao, PhD, looks, this is Chinese. Published July 2021. Why can't I see the whole paper? Do I have to pay for it? Oh. Declaration of interest. We declare no competing interests. Okay, so they don't work for any oil companies or anything like that. Yeah, let's see if I can put this in the chat and you guys can look at it. So when I asked last week about, can you think of the positive benefits of global warming? Well, here's one on a real paper. Can you guys see that? I think that's a link to a journal which has the paper in it. But did anybody, do you ever watch Scott Adams? No. More farmland? Well, yeah, another unintended positive consequences of global warming is not only more farmland, but more crop seasons. And remember, CO2 is not a pollutant, it's plant food. So I think there's also another paper on the amount of green leaves, how it's increased over time as global warming has happened. Because CO2 is literally plant food. It's called something you learned in high school called photosynthesis. You take sunlight, CO2, you create oxygen and sugar. Will you consider running for congressman? Would anybody vote for me? I think I would be a good politician, actually, because I don't hate people on the left. I don't hate Democrats. I don't hate people on the far right. I lean middle right, but I understand why they think and why they do the things they do and what's important to them, what they value, I think, based on the science. So I think I could be the type of guy to get things done. But the thing is, if I ever ran for politics as a House member, or Senator Pine Creek now has the floor. I mean, the country is still mostly Christian. They'd look at my atheist content and, oh my goodness. You want to vote for this man who denies God as his Lord and personal Savior? Doesn't he know this country was founded on the principles of Judeo-Christendom? You know, atheists are the worst people on the planet. You want your kids to die by having an atheist in the White House? Freeman Dyson on climate change would be your favorite thing. You made a fair case of why we shouldn't care about climate change as a political motivated. We shouldn't care about climate change as a political motive. Did I say that? No, what I'm saying is that I lean towards being non-alarmist. But I totally understand that people can look at the same data and be alarmist or non-alarmist. I'm saying that, yes, bad things are going to happen, but also some good things are going to happen. That's the point of what I'm saying. So the steelman people who disagree with what I'm saying is that we only have one planet, and when it's gone, we're gone. Don't trust or count on Elon Musk to get us to Mars or wherever else. It's not going to happen. That's steelman on the other side. That's the worst case scenario, right? That's steelman in the alarmist position. So we need to do everything in our power today to make the world a better place. But it's very similar to if you take the alarmist position that if we don't make drastic changes sooner rather than later, if you take that position, knowing that it might be too late already, knowing that you can't control China, knowing that you cannot control Indonesia or Bangladesh. If you came late, I showed the top 10 countries in the world in population. If you can't control China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Russia, oh yeah, try controlling Russia, the West. Good luck with that. Mexico. If you can't control these countries and get them to be on board, I mean, your goose is cooked if you take the alarmist position. So then it becomes sort of like having stage 4 cancer. Are you going to take the chemo treatments and be nauseous every day? Chemo treatments being energy costs will go through the roof, carbon tax, all this stuff. Or are you going to enjoy what years you have left and have a good quality of life? Drive your Ford F-150. And when the tidal wave comes, you take a big breath in, let it all out, and then the next inhale will be nothing but water. And you say goodbye to life. I'm laughing, but I know that some people are hearing this and they're just like crying. There's like, but there's actually some truth in what I'm saying there. If you take the alarmist position, you might just have to accept we're going into extinction and make the best of your life. I don't accept the alarmist position. I have hope that technology and that there's going to be some good benefits of whatever, and that we will take slow baby steps. But if you're an alarmist position, I mean, if you're like a Greta Thunberg type person, given all the things outside of the control on the planet, like these countries, and what's already been done, if you're like a dire alarmist and the worst projections could happen and we're done. We're going extinct. Enjoy the last few years. Tell your kids, sorry, we did what we could, but you're going to die. Or, maybe 4 generations from now. Just try to have a good quality of life and we'll... And if you take an alarmist position, really, having humans go extinct is great for the planet. Maybe this is what the world needs, for us to be gone. And who are you to stand in the way of nature? Sure, you want to live, but you're being selfish. If you're truly an environmentalist, you would take your humanity's extinction like a man, walk into that night, hand in hand. Oh yeah, well, it's not like humanity's going to die. We'll have AI to take over for us. And they'll remember us, right? Those robots will remember me. They will still have the YouTube videos on their hard drives. So I will live on as the AI remembers me. And everybody who's talked here in the chat, it will be recorded. We will live on. So please know, everyone here is going to die. Well, maybe not you, but your children's children. Because there's no way we can control all these variables and get things done. Because China and India hate you. Maybe not India. Pakistan hates you. So that's that. What I suggest now, what you do is, if you're a left-leaning alarmist, go to your fridge right now. If you have a beer, go ahead and drink it. I can just tell how strongly some people hate me for making light of this. But yet, I am also quite confident that some of the alarmists on the left actually agree with the things I'm saying. And Doug's right, we're all going to die. Yeah, go get yourself a Molson's. Whatever you do, though, don't. If you're tempted to grab a pill that's orange and barrel shaped, no. It's not that time. That's a SNL skit. Remember that one with Dan Aykroyd? The guy calls in. He's like on a bad trip. He's all high. Roger, did you take a pill that's orange and barrel shaped? Yeah, I did. I'm freaking out, man. Okay, listen to me carefully. I want you to go to your fridge. You got a beer, go ahead and drink it. Get a cigarette out. Go ahead and light it now. God's going to create a new planet anyhow. Japheth, there you go. There's a solution. If you think this planet's doomed, don't worry. God's going to save the day. By the way, this is why evangelicals are not worried about climate change. Christian evangelicals in the United States don't care about climate change. You know why? Because Jesus is going to come back. Yeah, smoke him if you got him. Exactly, Reed. But I dare any left-leaning alarmist to call in right now and tell me I'm wrong. Like, you know I'm right? That the odds of China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Russia, Mexico, Japan all getting on board with your environmental policies, you know that's not going to happen in at least in the next 50 years. You know what we've done in the last 20 years, if you're alarmist, is it's going to affect the next 50 years. You know I'm right. You know we're cooked, literally. So just relax. Buy an Oculus and play putt-putt golf. Anything in the news is always hyperbole. If it ain't alarmist, it doesn't catch the audience. Yeah. And please get your facts from the scientists in the papers. If you came late, there's papers out there that say that the frequency of hurricanes have not gone up. So you can at least, when you die, it's going to probably be from drowning, but not a hurricane. It won't be a stop sign hitting you in the spleen. If you believe that humans cause climate change is real, do you not want to have your kids enjoy the world? Oh, it's too late, Antonio Lewis. Don't put that on me. My kids are cooked. If I would have known this before I had them, I probably wouldn't have conceived. But I was selfish. I wanted hope, meaning, and purpose by bringing up kids. It's not a question of what I want. It's the question of the facts, Antonio Lewis. It's facing reality. I know there's no heaven. There's no eternal future for my kids. In the same way, I know their goose is cooked. Boy, Lawrence Brown, you really want me to watch Freeman Dyson? Is he funny? Because if he's not funny, why should I watch him? I don't want to watch anything serious anymore because I want a high quality of life. Oh yeah, there's no way. Let me show a picture of this guy. I'll bet big money that this guy is not funny. But my guess is you want me to play him because he agrees with some of my sentiments. Okay, let's see. Let's bring him up. It's only 3 minutes. Okay.
Well, that's a big subject, of course, and I mean, I don't like the word catastrophe. I don't think there's any catastrophe there, but certainly the climate is changing, and that's important.
Oh, he's a physicist and a writer, okay? This is important. If you're a physicist and you're a good writer, I'm assuming he's a good physicist and a good writer if he does this for a profession. That means you have both sides of your brain working. That means he's good at English and math. So you should trust everything he says.
it's always been changing. There's never been a time when the climate stayed put for any length of time, and so I would say all the evidence we have is that we're having some effect on the climate. It's not clear whether it's good or bad.
This is heresy to some people. Not clear if it's good or bad. It's all bad, Mr. What's your name? Freeman Dyson. Don't you keep up with the science?
Not clear whether it's going to become a catastrophe or not. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's very foolish to do anything spectacular.
You know what's scary about this guy is not what he's saying. What's scary is he looks like one of my great uncles. Seriously, I have big ears too. They're kind of like, and I have a big nose. He has more hair than me, but that could be a toupee. Do you think that's a toupee? No, that looks real. But yeah, he looks like he'd be my great uncle.
What we should be doing is dealing with the problems in detail. I mean, the first thing is we should build dikes around New Orleans. And I mean, there are simple, practical things we can do.
Yes. Sea levels rise. What do? You adapt, you change, you build walls. And building dikes around New Orleans, it not only keeps the sea out from, and it keeps all the immigrants out too. Come on, laugh. I'm feeding into the stereotype right-wing stuff. I'm just giving them what they want. You get a 2-for-1 deal.
Which really would help. And like building dikes around cities which are exposed to hurricanes.
There's this idea of, I gave the alarmist position that it's hopeless, our goose is cooked. But there's practical things we can do with our hands today that don't involve carbon taxes and raising price of cheap energy that impact real poor people. We can actually create jobs by saying, hey, it's going to happen, so let's prepare. Let's build walls, dikes. Look what Holland did. Isn't a big chunk of their country on stilts? Let's just put Florida on stilts.
Or tsunamis, and so these kind of practical measures could be enormously helpful. I mean, we've seen just in the last few months, we've seen 2 big earthquakes, one in Haiti and one in Chile, and what we've seen is that the earthquake in Chile was much larger, but the damage actually was smaller. The reason being that Chileans had taken more trouble to build buildings
that were good,
that would resist earthquakes.
Yeah.
And so it actually helps enormously to strengthen your buildings. Of course,
but what this Freeman Dyson guy is missing is, if we do what he suggests and adapt and change and prepare, that will only benefit capitalism, the big construction companies. I mean, but the goal here is to get more socialism. And so doesn't he realize this? Remember last week, the quiet part was said out loud? Climate change is really about getting the world socialist. I'm just saying the particular person I interviewed believed that.
Advantage of being a richer country to start with, but it's a dramatic proof of what you can do. You can actually take a natural catastrophe and reduce the damage by a factor of 100 or so.
Yep.
Just by quite simple measures.
See, but this is pull yourself up by the bootstraps type talking. Who is he to say stuff like this, to actually work and prepare and be responsible? This guy is talking about community and personal responsibility. New Orleans should take steps and no, then who do we blame? We need people to blame. We don't accept reality and then make preparations to help solve our own problems. We don't do that here. This is America.
Just having good building codes. And the same is true of climate, that there are all sorts of things we can do in a practical way. It's not only we don't only have to worry about warming.
Thanks, Lawrence. This guy, old geezers, is turning out to be funny for me because I'm vamping off him here. This guy and me. I don't know if he's still alive. He's probably dead by now. But if he's still alive, he and I should go on the road on some type of climate change tour. He could be the straight guy, the Dean Martin, and I'll be the Jerry Lewis. I mean, we'll be a hit. I will tell jokes and he'll just sit there.
About cooling, and could very well be the climate gets colder. Nobody knows. And there are many things we should be doing to prepare for that, and they're not all that expensive. But what I think is absurd, what I disagree with very strongly, is the idea that climate is predictable, that we can do things 100 years in advance, knowing what's going to happen. That's just not the way it is.
Well, how about 50? Would you take 50? We got models going up to 50, or even at 100. Well, let's be fair though. This was done 10 years ago. If he was still, is he dead? Anybody know? Could someone tell me? Maybe he's changed. Oh, he died this year. That's sad. I guess I won't do a weekend at Bernie's. Is weekend at Bernie's and prop him up when I do my tour. You should go deeper into Dyson, maybe off stream. Wonder if he died of COVID. But yeah, thanks, Lawrence. This was fun. Okay, if nobody wants to talk to me, yell at me. I'll leave. But I'll stay here for a couple minutes. Let me know. Tag me if you want to get something off your chest. You have a 60 to 120 second delay. Oh, it's probably... Is it that long? No. I would say it's closer to 20 seconds. Actually, I can time it. Hang on. So in real life, live right now, I'm going to put up my finger and then see how long it takes. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, boom. Okay, now I'm going to watch the replay and see how long it takes to see myself put up my finger. I should have gave myself the finger. Oh, here we go. 14-second delay. So please know that when you hear me, whatever I say happened 14 seconds sooner. No, it's 14 seconds. Hey, Germania, I have a job. I have good internet. I guess maybe it's not up to my internet. Oh, yeah, it is up to my internet. It's up to the upload speed. Yes, Charles B. Charles B., you lean left. I know it. And you can acknowledge that there's benefits to more CO2 in the air. Good for you. You and I can be friends. Because you can think. Previous alarmist predictions have been wrong. Oh, you're giving me goosebumps, Charles B. I'm getting verklempt. And every DNS relay between you and YouTube. Yes, of course. But I think upload speed is the primary factor, right? That's the limiting factor. Tag me if you want to come on, otherwise I'm ending this soon. And don't forget tonight at 7 Pacific. I will be interviewed by Marty, who's one of our token females at poker. What she's going to ask me, I don't know. Honestly, don't know. She might get out of me my deepest and darkest secrets. It'll be on my main channel, so you don't want to miss it. I might say something really clip-worthy. Charles B is being sarcastic and trying to humiliate you, Pine Creek. Oh, no. Here I had hope. I thought you were getting that plant increase with CO2 thing from Freeman Dyson. No, I didn't. I don't get it from other people. I think thoughts. You know how many times I've said some things on my channel that are sort of philosophical nature, and people say, this great philosopher back in the 300s said this. Oh, I guess I'm late to the game. Stay strong, be dead inside. Now that should be on a t-shirt. I just watched myself blow my own nose. Doug is dead, so I cannot be humiliated. Well, it is tough. You can come on and try. Oh yeah, Dalai Lama, smash that like button. You don't want to be a freeloader. I know there's a lot of leftist leaning people here, but you realize you're freeloading right now. How much money did you pay to be here? You can't press the like button or the subscribe. Typical socialists. I use guilt as a motivator, just like the Christians, right? How am I not your mod? You love me. No. I made Gurmania a mod for a specific reason, and you haven't fulfilled that reason for me. Oh, that sounds sexual. Poof. It's platonic between me and Gur. Strictly platonic.